This is David Mandel at OHEL. We thank everyone for joining us this evening on a very important discussion, Reimagining Perinatal Loss, sponsored by OHEL's Zach the Family National Trauma Center. Before introducing the discussion and our illustrious panelists, I would like to thank my colleagues, Sivi Ryder, Director at OHEL of the National Trauma Center, the Zach the Family National Trauma Center and Children's Services, Cheryl Charnowski, Coordinator of the National Trauma Center, our colleague Yitz Elman, Director, and Ari Kenigsberg, Assistant Director in Technology, for helping us to organize this evening. Let's begin with a definition. What is perinatal loss? It is commonly defined as loss of an infant through death via unintended or involuntary loss of pregnancy by miscarriage, early loss, generally less than 20 weeks, stillbirth, or neonatal loss, newborn through 28 days of life. Perinatal loss may also result in some women, wives, mothers, and of course affecting husbands and children, in secondary infertility. So we will discuss in detail perinatal loss. We will also touch on secondary infertility. Anyone that has any questions, we welcome you to use the chat function by either asking your question using the private mode or using the chat function, which everyone will see your question. We have many questions that have been submitted in advance, which we will get to, and we will try to get to virtually everyone's question this evening. We would like to begin by introducing Rabbi Ephraim and Rebbetzin Yocheved Goldberg from Boca Raton, in the Boca Raton Synagogue. You know, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldberg, there used to be someplace called Miami, and there used to be someplace called Jerusalem. Now there's just someplace called BRS. No one even explains what it is. Everyone has to just understand what BRS means. And you are the Rav and the Rebbetzin of an incredible community. Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg is the senior Rav Mod Asra of BRS, the Boca Raton Synagogue, a rapidly growing congregation of more than 900 families in Boca Raton Synagogue. Rabbi Goldberg is a sought-after scholar in residence. He's spoken at national and international conferences. He reaches many through his popular blog, including Behind the Bima. I believe it is on Motzei Shabbos, Saturday nights, and along with his frequent contributions on Aish.com and OU.org. Rebbetzin Yocheved Goldberg is a college teacher, a mother of 7, a licensed social worker. We're going to begin with Rav and Rebbetzin Goldberg, and then I will introduce each of the panelists. Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldberg, thank you so much for joining us. And we know that you have experienced this conversation personally. So you are speaking both personally, and you are also speaking from your responsibility as a pulpit rabbi of a very large and expanding organization. B'chvod Rabbi Goldberg.
David, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for this opportunity. We're so indebted to OHEL for providing this webinar, this platform, this opportunity for people to connect to a topic. I know the feedback we've received, even just before the panel, of the people who feel validated just that this conversation is happening, and it's a conversation so many need. I think the first thing we want to communicate is those who are listening, those who are watching, our heart goes out to you. There are people who've been affected by miscarriage, by stillbirth. There are people who've had to terminate pregnancies for medical reasons, and they've done what is right and righteous and correct and unbearably painful nonetheless. And the pain that you are enduring and you're going through, you're in our tefillos, you're in our thoughts. We don't have to know who you are to feel part of a community of people who are longing and yearning and dreaming, and who've had to overcome dreams that are yet unrealized or dreams that have been disappointments and crushed. And we're thinking about you. I want to acknowledge our other panelists and the organizations that we're in awe of people who've taken their own pain and turned it into inspiring and helping and supporting others. What you do is absolutely incredible. We know because our members of our community benefit, and we just say thank you to you. Hashem should continue to give you strength and wisdom and the resources to continue doing your great work, and it shouldn't be necessary in the future. So I just want to say one word of introduction, and Yocheved's really going to share our story, which is our story. In many ways, it's her story, certainly in a very different way than it was for me, in what she had to endure physically, not only emotionally and spiritually. I was meeting with someone today in the shul, and they said, they saw this panel, this program, this webinar advertised, and they said, wow, what changed now 21 years later? You've processed it. Have you gotten help? Will you only now feel comfortable? What's different that tonight you're taking your story and you're sharing it publicly for the very first time? And I was startled. And I said, what's different is this is the first time anyone's asked. We have not been hiding it, and we've not been holding it close for 21 years. It was an experience. I've referenced it in passing in Shiurim. Yocheved hasn't had the opportunity. And we weren't about to come out and say, listen to our story, feel bad for us. We're incredibly indebted to OHEL. And we're indebted that we're living at a time that we now have support systems and groups and WhatsApp and organizations and platforms online and offline to have a conversation like this, to process individually and collectively, to listen, to learn, to find strength and to find support. And when I realized that when we went through this 21 years ago, that didn't exist. I remember how desperate we were to read or to listen or to find something that could give us strength and solace and guidance. And it didn't really exist. It didn't exist in a meaningful way, at least that we found. And fast forward to today, and just this panel and the organizations and the people is evidence of how far we've come in that way. And we thank you for this opportunity. And we hope that we can in some way contribute to this conversation. So Yocheved, please.
Hi, I'm Yocheved Goldberg. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. It's definitely a topic that needs to be explored and that people should feel validated. So we hope that we'll be able to provide that for you by giving over our story, our experience. And of course, from all the other panelists who have so much experience with this, the people they work with and what they all experienced on their own. So we're grateful to all of you. So we first got married like a typical young couple. Figured, you get married and you have a baby, right? So, thank God Hashem was very good to us and did bless us with a pregnancy very quickly. And unfortunately, that first pregnancy ended at 9 weeks. I just been to the doctor. We were excited that we were going to have a baby. And then in 9 weeks, I was day after the doctor appointment, I started miscarrying and that ended that pregnancy. And it was hard for us at that time because, first of all, we were like embarrassed, ashamed. We didn't understand. We didn't know that happens. Everyone thinks, like I said, it's a fairy tale. You get married, you have a baby. And the fact that our first pregnancy already ended was very shocking and startling to us. And it definitely was something we had to work through. I remember we were very private about it. We didn't want to know. It was a very confusing time. I went off to Eretz Yisrael, and thank God soon after I got pregnant again. We luckily had a daughter, and then 20 months later we had another daughter, and then I don't know how many months later, but I was pregnant again, and we were very excited. It was, thank God, a very uneventful pregnancy. Everything was very smooth sailing. We used the same doctor who delivered our daughter, and we were just kind of going, everything was fine because our previous 2 pregnancies were really uneventful, and thank God they were healthy and everything was good. And I was driving, I at my 30-week checkup, it was my 8th month checkup. I was going monthly for appointments, and we had actually just switched doctors. Of course, this appointment we switched to actually a doctor who was a friend of ours, who was part of our community. I wanted to use a woman, and she was someone that we were getting to know, and I switched to her practice. But in order to be part of her practice, she was working for another doctor. So at that appointment, I had to see the other doctor in case, they required that you see other doctors in the practice. So that appointment, of course, I had to see this other doctor who I really had no relationship with and wasn't the most sensitive, emotional person. And at that appointment, she's doing the Doppler, and she's looking for a heartbeat, and she's like struggling, keeps like feeling around, she can't hear anything, and I'm like, just don't really know what's going on. And she very abruptly says to me, I'm not hearing a heartbeat, you need to go to the hospital. And I was just in shock. Of course, it was also one of the first appointments that my husband didn't come with me.
I've been
So
to every appointment, I think, by that.
Yeah, I was all alone at that appointment and just very shocked by what she was telling me. And I remember that drive because I still drive that drive today, because it's right near my kid's school, where I had to drive from her doctor's office to the hospital all alone. And the whole car ride, I just kept pushing on my stomach and just trying to see if there was any way that maybe she was wrong, maybe there's a chance. And the car ride, I started realizing there's no movement, and I was just crying. It was a really, really rough moment where it started sinking in slowly. We get to the hospital, my husband comes right away. I'm a little bit of an underreactor. So I remember calling my husband saying, I don't know, I think you should come meet me at the hospital. It seems like something's wrong. And then we got there, and the doctor explained, and it was clear that things, they hooked me up to an ultrasound, and they started seeing that there was really no heartbeat, no movement. And that's when we started realizing that it was over. Thank God my doctor was there, the one who I had a relationship with. And I'm going to speak about it at some point further, but having a doctor who we felt comfortable with, who we had a relationship with, was a game changer for this experience for us. And that's something that I really do recommend to people when you find a doctor, to make sure that it is a doctor who, if you do go through something difficult, will be there for you, will be sensitive and caring. And that was something we were very, very fortunate to have. So the hospital sent us home, go get a bag, you're going to be coming in, and we have to induce you. And so again, we were just kind of in shock, because we had, 2 children. We just did not expect this. And I was fully pregnant. I already had a big stomach. I was actually teaching in a preschool, and I just kept thinking I was pregnant one day, not pregnant. But like, this was all just so many emotions, so many thoughts. How are we going to handle this? How are we going to deal with it? And it was all happening very quickly. We went home, we packed a bag, and then we got to the hospital, and it was a very, very long and difficult induction. I was nowhere near ready to deliver. It was really hard to have to go through a whole labor and delivery, knowing that at the end, we wouldn't have a baby to go home with. And that was something that we really, we struggled with. And it ended up being a very long induction. And my doctor literally stayed with me the entire time. She held my hand. We were talking about Judaism. We were talking about Emunah. We were talking about life. She literally sat by my bedside and just cried with me and spoke to me the whole night. She was such a gift. And I just sent her a voice note just this week when we were doing this podcast, this event, just to thank her again for what she did for me during that time. But she was a tremendous support. And, we, after that, I had to recover, and the recovery was hard. I remember when
Even that moment, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, please.
But just, thank God we had 2 healthy children, and the experience of, the big moment where you're in labor, they're tracking your contractions, they're seeing how close you are. And when they're ready, the whole room transforms. It's ready for the big show, the delivery, the moment. And when that baby comes out, and whether you know what you're having, you don't know what you're having, it's announced, that first view of the baby and the first cry of the baby and the cutting of the umbilical cord and all of that surrounds in one moment. And this is speaking from the person who didn't endure any pain, but all of the pain of the 9 months and all the pain of the delivery and the contractions and everything. But to see that baby and to go into your arms makes it worth it. The reward is there immediately. And that contrast, I'll just never forget, is it was the exact parallel experience. It's in the same hospital room and similar nurses and personnel, and the room transforms when you're dilated and you're ready. Only what you give birth to has no life. And then instead of the joy and announcement and celebration, it's an overwhelming darkness and sadness, and it's death. It's literally contact with death.
Right. I'm sorry. I'm not giving all the
No,
details.
yeah.
Yeah. No, we had 2 girls, and we found out that we were having a boy this pregnancy also. We didn't know at that point that we'd have 4 more girls after, and kept not having a boy every pregnancy. But whatever. That was a different story.
We did have
Um,
our seventh.
We are
is a boy.
7th as a boy, yes, Baruch Hashem, and healthy girls, and we're thrilled and we're grateful. But thank God in the hospital also, just to, my doctor was great at the hospital, was also very, very caring and very, like, really understood the sensitivity of what was going on, and was so good to us and caring.
They put something outside the room
They
even.
put something, right, they did, they put something out of the room that, I don't remember what the words were, but they put a note, like, this is basically, this is a sad room, something like that, where they made it clear that it was not a baby being born, and this was not a happy situation, and they're very sensitive to us. I mean, it was,
You held the baby.
I was very confused after what to do. The baby didn't look like a typical baby. Apparently it had not been alive ready for a week inside of me. And I had no idea. I didn't know at that point to look for movement. Everything was normal, like I just didn't even think that I had to check anything or worry about anything. It was just, I'm a very chill person in general. I wasn't like looking for any signs. I wasn't thinking about it. It wasn't really on my radar that I should be looking for anything. And, when they told me that the baby had not been alive for a while already, I was just shocked. I couldn't believe it. And then I didn't know what to do. What are you supposed to do? Here's a baby. It was a full-size baby. It was actually a baby that would live today. There are babies that are much smaller, that live today, that are born premature, born earlier than 8th month, and they live today. And I think about them sometimes when I hear about people who have babies who are like 3 pounds and lived. This baby was almost 4 pounds. It could have lived at 17 inches, I think. And I didn't know what you were supposed to do. And someone from the community who was a nurse sent a message to me and said, make sure to affirm thing is, and make sure Yocheved holds the baby. And I'm so grateful to her, because I did. I held that baby. I took a few minutes and I connected, but I was so upset that I ended up kind of giving him back very quickly, and because I just didn't know what to do. And I will say that for weeks after, the most lingering guilty feeling that I had was that I didn't spend more time with that baby. I'm sure many of you could relate. I kept thinking, like, here was this holy neshama that I had nurtured for 8 months, and I had this opportunity to be with him. And I could not knock that feeling. I literally could not get over it for weeks after that I did not spend more time with him. And I don't know if anyone would say, yeah, you should have, or you could have. It wasn't even that, it didn't make sense to spend more time, but for some reason that was something that weighed very, very heavily on me. And I could not handle the fact that I didn't give more attention and time to that baby. That's just one thing that I remember that I really grappled and struggled with after. Stayed in the hospital for a couple of days. I had to recover. And again, they were very caring and sensitive. And we had people who were helping us with our kids. The community, he was in a leadership position. We were in the community call at that point, and we made a lot of connections to people. The community was up in arms. They were so upset for us. They were so sad for us. People reached out, and want to help. And I remember that soon after, people did try to reach out. I couldn't speak to anyone. I mean, there was literally I could not deal with people. I couldn't deal with life. I was a mess. I was really a mess. It took me a long time to get back to myself. I physically was a mess. I remember when my milk came in, and it was like a whole other, I can't believe that I'm dealing with this pain and I can't even do anything with it. It was literally like, I couldn't, it was awful. It was just awful. And, I didn't really have anyone to turn to. I didn't really want to speak to anyone, even if I had someone. We didn't have the support then. It was 21 years ago. There was really no support group or support staff or anyone that I really felt comfortable speaking to. I'll tell you, my doctor was really like my therapist then. Every time I struggled, my husband would put me on the phone with her, and she made the time and she talked me through my feelings. I think the fact that she was there with me gave me such a special, deep connection to her, and I felt she really understood me and the situation. So I felt very comfortable, and it was comforting to speak to her. But there was really no one who could be helpful to me at that time. I just needed to take the time. My husband was extremely helpful. We really went through it together, and that would be another thing that I would say, that to have a good marriage, to have a good spouse, someone who's so sensitive and caring and will go through difficult times with you, it's everything. It's literally everything. I mean, I don't know how I would have gotten through it without him being the sensitive, kind person that he is. He literally helped me through it, and we helped each other through it. And he'll talk to you about how he struggled and what his feelings were and what it's like for a husband, father too, because they also lost a baby. They didn't connect in the same way. They didn't carry that baby, but they very much lost a baby as well. And that was something that he'll talk about. But he was a tremendous support, and having that type of a marriage where we could go through that together was really something that helped me through it. And it really took me a very long time. I recovered physically, but emotionally it was much harder. And I did not get back into life for a good few weeks, I would say. And then at one point, my husband said to me, you're going to have to go out. You're going to have to be among people again. You're going to have to see the world. We can't stay in bed forever. He was right. And it was getting harder and harder for me to get out because I'd been in bed in my room for so long. So he kind of needed to encourage me. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't, I didn't need like therapy medication. It was a normal reaction. I just felt very bereft. I felt very empty. Thank God I had my other kids, which was such a bracha, but I just missed, it was a real emptiness. And it was something that was very hard for me to adjust to. And he said, let's go. We lived right next to a lake. We lived in these townhouses that surround a lake. He said, let's just go take a walk around the lake. And I think his chachma was that's like after Shiva, you take a walk around the block and it just helps you get out a little bit and just realize that life is going to move on and there is a future and there is nature and there's everything out there, and he felt that would be good for me, and that was really the beginning of me being able to heal. We went for a walk around the lake a few times. We were talking, we were crying. It was hard for me to be out, and might have passed by some people, I don't remember, but it was a good way for me to start living again, and that's what we did. And we took that walk, and then slowly I started getting back to myself. And I remember when we left that hospital room, it was actually room 18. And I said to the nurses as they wheeled me out, I said, I'll see you in a year. I said, I'll be back. I want to be back. And of course my doctor didn't think it would be a good idea for me to get pregnant right away. And we took a little time, and, she wanted me to heal. She wanted me to recover. Also, just to know, there was no reason for this stillbirth. A lot of times the umbilical cord will be around the neck, or there's something that's the cause of it. We have no idea till this day what the reasons were. There was absolutely no cause, nothing that we could, and I was I tried to be very positive at that moment. I said, I'm going to be back, and Baruch Hashem, a year later, we were back in room 18, delivering a healthy baby girl. And that was something that we feel is really very special. And we were very, very blessed. I will say that the following pregnancy was extremely stressful. I felt my belly every second of the day to make sure the baby was moving. I made her crazy. I was just pushing on her. Of course, she had to be the calmest baby on the planet, and she never moved. And I had to always have these scares where I'd go to the doctor and say she didn't move. I didn't feel any movement, because following that pregnancy, I was extremely paranoid. I'm very stressed. We drove on Shabbos once because I was sure that something was wrong. That's something that's very, very hard after, is that you're so worried that the same thing could happen, especially when there's no explanation. That you're now high risk. And we actually went to a perinatalogist for all of the following pregnancies, because my doctor was always want to have extra caution with us, that just in case there is something that we could detect early on, she wanted to make sure that we, have that extra care. So we went to a perinatalogist, and we're always extra careful with all of the subsequent pregnancies. But that following pregnancy, for those of you who could relate, was very, very stressful, fraught with a lot of stress, and always so worried and nervous what was going to be and if she was going to be okay. And so that's something that also is hard moving forward. That's pretty much our story. It was in 2001. We had the baby on October 18th, and we don't, a lot of people do like a yard site or visit a grave. We were told, I think we spoke to Rav about it, and we were told that it's not the same as delivering a full-term baby. The baby did get a bris and was buried and had, and we gave him a name, but we don't commemorate the yard site. I think that was something that was helpful for us to be able to move on, but we have told our children about him, and they know all about our story, and we don't hide it, and we don't sugarcoat it. They have a lot of questions. Will we see him when Mashiach comes, and how does it work? They, on each of their age levels, they have questions, but I think it's important for them to know. I think it's important. When I teach Kalas, I tell them to know that, so that miscarriages, stillbirths, that this is common, and don't, be like me or a marriage baby. You have to be real, and you have to know what life has to offer and be prepared. That's our story.
I'm just going to fill in a couple more points because I know we have amazing panelists, and we'll come back to other conversations. we have no judgment of people who handle it differently. There are those who need to, for their own grieving and their own comfort and their own recovery, attend or know where a stillbirth is buried and visit. There are those who have more observances of mourning, those who have less. That was what we followed. That's what we had been instructed, or that's what we had been encouraged. The Ramah, this is not a New Age thing. It's the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch itself that says that even a stillbirth, you give a bris. And we found this amazingly comforting, that the notion that even though this boy never lived, but when Mashiach comes and when there'll be a Tchias HaMesim, when the dead come back to life, we'll meet this son, we'll meet this baby. Our children will meet their sibling, our grandchildren will meet their uncle. And in order to recognize or to identify, to have a name, you give a name. And so rather than compounding pain, it actually provided comfort to give a name and to know that this isn't just an anomaly or a statistic or a point of data or a natural phenomenon that went wrong. This is a person, and they have a name, and we will one day meet them yet, and they are a part of the family. And the bris, the same thing. The Ramah quotes the source of giving a bris, because how could a Jew come back to life with Mashiach and not come back mahol, not come back with a bris? So I didn't attend and we didn't go. There are holy, holy, incredible people who do this kind of thing. And as a rabbi, I've had to help and be there for others. But rather than that compound pain, that actually was a source of comfort to us. And there really, we found, is that balance between, on the one hand, distinguishing between somebody who lived and passed away, where of course you mark a grave and mark a yurt site and observe a shiva. So on the one hand, in this case for us, there wasn't that, there was never life, so it's different. But on the other hand, it's also not embryonic fluid. It's also not a chemical. It's also not, cutting off a cuticle. This was a neshama that came to this world, a holy neshama, like Yocheved said.
It was a real baby. I mean,
Yeah,
he had a real look to him, and it was a real person.
Absolutely. So that custom, that tradition, the hospital, as I said, was great. I think they must be even better today, because this was 21 years ago. But the fact that they had a package and they did things that never were thought to ask, but yet as a source of comfort. We went today and opened an envelope we haven't opened in many years. And there's whoops. I don't know what's going on.
Oh my God. Oh, you can't tell.
Everything is good.
Sorry. Yeah, there's a sorry about that. There's a
they gave us
the hospital, they gave us a package that had the footprints of the baby, that had a picture holding the baby. You can actually therefore see the size and see the face. And the truth is, we had never, we have 3 married children, 2 of whom are mothers, and we hadn't really unpacked this with our children. We'd never shown them the pictures of these footprints. We'd never shown them the picture of the baby, of their brother. And today we did. It was the first time. It was really sort of going back in time, because, and this is important to say too, and David, I'm going to hand it back in a moment, but we are unbelievably blessed, and we feel unbelievably blessed. And while this was unbearably painful while it happened, and Yocheved described a little bit, and as a husband, I watched, not knowing if my wife would ever bounce back, and would she ever want to try to have another child, and would we be capable of having children, and if it ever was a boy again. And then we proceeded to have 4 more girls, and wondering whether there's a problem. Can she not carry a boy? Could we have a boy? Would we have a boy? If it were a boy, would it ever live? There was so much that was unknown, and that was difficult in that time. And so, but on the whole, we look back and say that was unbearably painful while it happened, but it doesn't inform, inspire us on a daily or a regular basis. But I will say, that same day in October 2001 that the stillborn was born, there was another member of our community who gave birth to a boy in the same hospital, a few rooms down. And that was also, so happy for them. And there was a bris a week later. And I would say in the last 21 years, they then moved from the community. And it's another rabbinic couple. And in the last 21 years, the only thing, at least for me, that opens up an old wound or makes me wonder is when their name comes up, I wonder, we wonder what's happening with their son. He's 21 years old. Where is he? Is he married? What yeshiva is he in? What hashkafa does he have? What's he like? And what would our 21-year-old be like to sort of track life through their son, born literally that very same day? So on the whole, we feel unbelievably blessed by Hashem. We are unbelievably blessed by Hashem. And this was a unbearably painful point of time. And when you freeze that frame, it felt like it could last forever. If we knew then what we'd have now, of course, it would have been much more comforting to go through. And that's why part of this process is to not be overwhelmed or paralyzed in that moment, but be able to try to live with some hope and some scope and some breath. And there's a lot more
I know you could help others also when you go through something. That
Yeah,
you could then
to
be a
use that
source of strength
experience.
to others. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot more thoughts hashkafically and
We could go
practically,
on for hours,
but we
sure.
have incredible people here who have a lot to share, and we look forward to listening and learning from you. So thank you so much.
Winston Churchill is quoted as saying that there is no conversation, no crisis that requires more than a 20-minute conversation. Winston Churchill was wrong. This conversation is just remarkable. Rabbi Goldberg, I would like to acknowledge what you did very early on was in your introductory comments as a father and as a Rav, not only of a congregation, but of a community. Shortly after you made your introductory comments, you said, my wife should really be speaking about this, understanding that this is affecting a woman, a mother, a wife in a very different way than a husband and a father. Obviously, we see how it affects both profoundly, but there's no question how it affects a woman in a different way. Rebbetzin Goldberg, you talked about being pregnant one day and not being pregnant the next day. We'll get back to that comment. You spoke about the overwhelming darkness. You spoke about holding the baby, that very important advice that you received from your friend, from a nurse. And you both spoke about no judgments for Rabbi Goldberg on how other people handle loss differently. Everyone handles it in the way they handle it. And your comment about wondering, where would your son be today, 21 years later, on that very same day that someone else was born? Dr. Norman Blumenthal is Ohel Zakta Family Director, the National Trauma Center, a professor at YU on teaching pastoral counseling, and also having a private practice in Cedarhurst, Queens. Dr. Blumenthal has literally traveled the country, Canada, Israel, England, representing Ohel in trauma and crisis. Dr. Blumenthal, your thoughts, please, on Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldberg's comments.
I will be very brief. First of all, the rishus of Prof. Goldberg. I'm actually reminded of a situation that I was in as a child. Like David, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. And one of the aspects of growing up as a child of a Holocaust survivors is that when you have your typical problems that a kid may have in your life growing up in normal circumstances, you know, you dropped the pop-up in the ball game, or your peanut butter and jelly sandwich fell on the floor and you didn't have lunch, you can't complain. Because when you think about what your parents were going through at a comparable age, it seems so trivial. I'm reminded of that as I listen to the Goldbergs and as I look at the panels and many people who I've worked closely with and whose story I know. And what can I say? So I'm really very humbled, and I'm going to have just very brief comments, but with acknowledged respect for everybody else here who knows so much more about the subject, and I'm anxiously waiting to hear from. Somebody I was counseling once, who had a young man whose wife and he had a stillbirth, told me that after it happened, they went to speak to someone I knew, by the way, who I usually found who is able to give very good advice. And his response to them was, well, you didn't lose a baby, you lost the potential. And I found that jarring. First of all, I think anyone who dies before the age of 120 you're losing a potential. As long as there's life, there's potential. And therefore, I don't see how that in any way is different. But I think it harks back to a time, and Rabbi Goldberg, in his skillful remarks, alluded to this, when we didn't look at the birth of an infant or the death of an infant as the death of a person. And we certainly don't look at it that way now. In fact, sometimes perinatal loss is referred to as a disenfranchised grief. I want to reiterate what Rabbi Goldberg said, that everybody's response is unique, and there's no one size fits all when it comes to grief. It's hayesh machov k'machov vi. But I think increasingly so, we recognize that this is a baby, this is a child, this is a sibling, this is somebody to name, to remember, and to think about and to anticipate reuniting with. Just quickly, what's I think some very important sentiment that's been expressed to me when I'm in the sort of counseling role, which I think can also facilitate our conversation. Sometimes people will say, well, it was only an infant, or even if it's, what can you say? How do you, if you lose someone, God forbid, if you lose an older child, or even if you lose a spouse or a parent, you can put into words the connection. You can put into words what your connection relationship is with this loved one. The relationship, particularly between a mother and an infant, but even secondarily, vicariously between a father and an infant, is, I don't think, any less profound, but there are no words to describe it. It's much more visceral. It's much more sort of pre-verbal. So in commemorating and remembering these infants, it's very hard to give that over to others because there isn't a commonality of language that captures it. But I mean, there's also much more of a connection today due to technology with the sonograms and Dopplers and the stethograph, everything that we have much more of a connection with the infant, even prenatally, and therefore that engenders that closer relationship and that actual loss. So I'm going to sort of maybe launch conversation with the true experts by acknowledging, yes, the person was right. You lost the potential. That any death is a loss of a potential, but there's the loss of a real person, of a real child, of a sibling, of a grandchild. And we're increasingly aware of it, and a lot of it is due to the courage and the forthrightness of everybody here, and the efforts of the various organizations, many of which I've had the privilege of working with, to bring that message to not only those who are grieving, but to the community at large.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blumenthal. Rabbi Goldberg, you mentioned at the outset how much of a generational change this is, that you were speaking here publicly. No one had asked you earlier. You might have spoken about this 5, 10, 15 years ago. As Dr. Blumenthal mentioned, he and I, and I'm sure many others listening and people that we know, are children of survivors. And we know, as Dr. Blumenthal mentioned, that there were many first families that were lost. Children that were lost, multiple children that were lost, and a man or a woman we married never spoke about their first family. Never. And people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s were first finding out that they had half siblings from 50 years ago. As difficult as it is to share information with adult children, or children at whatever age they understand as you did, the importance of that was not only what you said about remembering that person. He had a name, he has a bris, they'll meet him, God willing, when Mashiach comes, but you're also preparing your family for life experiences that people have in many different ways. And we never know what life brings us. Hopefully only good things, but we know life also brings us challenges. So we teach children how to get up and from a fall. We teach children how to bandage a wound, not only a physical wound, but an emotional wound. And that's the importance of what you described about sharing that information. I'd like to introduce Dr. Amy Barron, founder and executive director of I Was Supposed to Have a Baby, a social media community on Instagram and Facebook to bring emotional support and comfort to those families struggling to have a child. She offers a warm and nurturing space for those experiencing pregnancy loss, infant loss, infertility, surrogacy, and adoption. My pleasure to introduce Dr. Amy Barron.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Precious the Rabbi. It is a deep honor to be here and to share a couple of words about my story and about the work that I do currently. So my story begins in that I'm a pediatrician by training, but I always dreamed of having a large family. And unfortunately, that didn't play out, because after my first child, we struggled for 3.5 years with secondary infertility. And during that period, after going through multiple fertility treatments, we unfortunately had an early loss, much like the Rebbetzin, much like Yocheved. Ours was at 8 weeks. It was absolutely devastating. And some of the things that, David, that you alluded to, the fact that, when people are thinking about this potential of life, and Dr. Blumenthal was thinking about this potential of life, and then you lose that potential of life, when someone is going through infertility and the years and years of wanting to have a child and then losing that child once you become pregnancy, the loss feels even more potent and even more difficult, even though that baby was only an early loss. So that's one piece I wanted to highlight in my story. We did thankfully go on to have a healthy pregnancy, and we had actually 2 healthy pregnancies. And I really thought that that wasn't going to be the end. We had 3 children, and I hope to have 4 or 5 or 6, God willing. We thankfully, getting pregnant at that point wasn't our problem anymore. I got pregnant with my 4th, and everything was going along beautifully. I made it past that 8-week mark where I'd lost the baby previously, and I thought I was home clear. Unfortunately, I walked in to the 16-week appointment, and there was no heartbeat. I had no warning. There was no bleeding. There was no contractions, nothing. And unfortunately, that exact situation happened 3 more times in a row over the span of 2.5 years. I went from having 1 early miscarriage to then having 4 more second trimester miscarriages without any medical explanation. And all of the emotions that the Rebbetzin Yocheved was speaking about, the grief, the not being able to get out of bed, the wafting of different pieces of not being able to understand how people could move on, but yet I had 3 children at home. All of those pieces were basically part of the fabric of my life. And I too eventually had to take that walk finally and go outside and start to live life again, not really understanding what happened, not understanding how I could put it in a place in my life that I'd be able to still take care of my children, but then carry this grief with me. The end of my story is that after that 4th loss, I was completely and utterly broken. I said to my husband, we're not doing this anymore. We spoke to our Rav, and he said, we didn't have to try anymore. And some point about a year or 2 later, I finally just said to my husband, I think we need to do this one more time and try every possible thing that every possible doctor has ever suggested to us, just because I need to know that I've done my hishtadlus beyond the ruchnius and all the davening and all the, praying at kfarim and the segulos and all the different pieces that I had tried. I just needed to know that I was doing both. And then obviously it was all up to Hashem, but that was sort of my last throwing down of the gauntlet, so to speak, and saying, okay, Hashem, this is in your hands. I'm doing it all. And now you're in charge. I have twins who are 9 years old, and they are delicious, and they are healthy, and they are amazing. They don't take away from the pain that I carry still with me to this day, which is why after they were 2 years old, I decided to go back to work. And speaking publicly, I live in Riverdale, speaking publicly in our shul. I ended up meeting Riva Judas, who's sitting right here, and I worked with Riva for 3 years, doing incredible work with Nechama Comfort. But what I saw was that there was an emergence of discussion, very large and beautiful and thoughtful discussions about infertility, pregnancy loss, surrogacy, adoption, terminations for medical reasons, et cetera, et cetera. And these discussions were happening, frankly, on social media. And they were happening outside of the Jewish community. They were happening in the public at large. And no one in the Jewish community was really taking to social media and talking about it. And so my work at I Was Supposed to Have a Baby is to bring those conversations to the fore, bring those conversations really into the palm of people's hands so that we can now support and validate and sensitize and educate everyone in the community that these problems, these awful circumstances that people find themselves in, that they exist. We support and validate the things that people are going through so that they know that they're not alone. 20 years ago, or even, 10 to 12 years ago, when I was going through all of my pain, none of this existed. To think that I could lay in my bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and I could actually see dozens and dozens and dozens of responses of people saying, oh my goodness, me too. Oh my goodness, me too. Oh my goodness, me too. It doesn't fill your empty arms, but it does help a little bit with the pain that sits in your heart. And so that is my work. And I look forward to hearing everyone else's stories and answering any questions that I can about this topic.
Dr. Barron, thank you very much. I would just like to highlight one comment you made. Dr. Blumenthal and I have a privilege of speaking on the issue of fertility. And I personally make it a point of using the word fertility, not infertility, just to emphasize the positive aspect of it. And you said after 4 pregnancy losses, I told my husband we're not going to try again. And then sometime later you said, I told my husband, let's try again. We need to do our shtadlus. And those words resonate with me because when I speak on fertility, I explain to husbands, listen to your wives on the conversation. They, no question, obviously husbands have, I'm a man, obviously husbands have a very important role in this entire conversation. Husbands need to listen to wives in a very significant way on the entire range of issues that we're discussing this evening. Thank you very much, Dr. Barron. I'd like to introduce Romi Friedman. Romi is director of HUG, 8 times pregnancy and infant loss program. Romi supports couples experiencing perinatal and infant loss. She's a trained doula and a chaplain. Romi is the UJA's liaison to the Haredi community in Brooklyn. Romi, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Romi Friedman, please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. So, Rabbi and Mrs. Goldberg, Rabbi Rebbetzin Goldberg, so much of your story was so painful to hear. Even all these years later, it was very easy to see your pain and to hear your pain. And even though I know it is the stories that Riva and Amy and I hear every single day, similar stories, it doesn't get easier to hear it. So I thank you for being so vulnerable, so open, and for willing to share with everyone what you experienced. My story is very different. My first pregnancy was a loss. I was 7, 8 weeks. I had gone to the doctor and had my pregnancy confirmed. I was 19 years old, and we were a bunch of couples, and everyone was pregnant and having babies, and we were super excited. And then I started staining, and it's very different. My loss was 38 years ago. The world was a different place. There were no cell phones. I went to a sonogram place, and they handed the phone to me. They had called the doctor, and on the phone, the doctor said to me, I'm really sorry that, there's no heartbeat, you're miscarrying. And I got into the car. I didn't drive. My grandmother and my aunt had driven me there. And I got into the car with them and I said, there's no heartbeat. And my grandmother said, well, at least you could get pregnant. And I know she meant well. It was very, very hard, that first loss. Baruch Hashem, we went on to have 4 healthy children. And then it was time to try again. And over the period of a year, I had 3 losses in succession. They were early. They were all about 8 weeks. But each time I had a loss, there was this compulsion to try again and to try again and to try again. But after 3 times, I couldn't do it again. I couldn't bring myself. I couldn't put myself through it again. And so we didn't. Baruch Hashem, my 4 are healthy and beautiful. And I'm a grandmother today, so I experience the joys of pregnancies through my kids. But I will say that I have done this with my children. I have 2 daughters who have had losses, one a second trimester loss and one an early loss. And I have a couple who struggles with infertility. So this is a journey that we experience in many, many different ways. And as Dr. Blumenthal said, and as David said, and as Rabbi Goldberg said, everyone experiences these journeys differently. And everyone experiences the grief differently. And some couples, and I just think it's so important for people who are listening, some couples choose not to hold and see the baby because that's either how they feel they can best get through it, or that's the psak that they were given not to. And I always feel like it's our job to meet them where they are. That's the best that we could do, is to meet people where they are, not necessarily where they want to be or where we think they should be, but rather in that place of grief that they're navigating in the best way that they can. I think that's crucially important. And I just want to add, sometimes even those of us who do this work have a tendency to not intentionally, but we sort of minimize the early losses because we know the stories of the really, really hard late losses when it's a delivery, when there's a baby that looks like a baby. Those early losses. Yes, Dr. Blumenthal, it is a hard thing to say to someone that all you've lost is potential, but wow, what that potential could be is incredible. And sometimes the loss of potential is worse, I think, than a loss of someone who was, because you're always dreaming about what could have been. Thank you. I appreciate so much being invited to be a part of this conversation, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Rumi, I've heard you speak several times, and you made such a critical point by saying when you counsel people, when you advise people, and they're experiencing a loss, before you give advice, you said, meet them where they are. Ask them, what are your thoughts? What would you like to do? And then you start from that point and give some advice. Because what you may have said yesterday to another couple may be completely different to the people standing in front of you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rumi. Riva Judas, founder and director of Nechama Comfort. One of the things I like about these organizations' names is in the name, they tell you exactly what they do. Nechama Comfort is an organization that supports family through the trauma of infant and pregnancy loss. She's counseled people around the world, trained medical staff, clergy, lay leaders, and communities in best practice for supporting grieving families. Riva received her chaplaincy certification from Hackensack Medical Center and is a Resolve Through Sharing certified infant pregnancy loss facilitator. Riva, it's good to see you this evening. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. And I'm in awe of all of you and tonight, because 35 years ago, when our son only lived for 12 hours, there was nothing. I know some of you have mentioned this, really nothing. And our son, we were a young couple in a small community called Teaneck. And it was small, and we were pregnant like all of our neighbors. Everything was great. And my father at the time was the rabbi in Reading, Pennsylvania. And we went there for Pesach. I was due a month later. And all of a sudden I gave birth to our son. And he was born with a severe congenital heart defect and lived for 12 hours. And at the time, I remember my parents being the rabbi and Rebbetzin of a community, being my parents, and taking care of my husband and myself. It was our first child, and my father didn't know what to do. And I remember him sitting in my hospital room after we had heard my son was born, and for 2 hours he was actually fine. He was 5 pounds, 5 ounces. And it wasn't until 2 hours later that they came in and told us that he had a severe congenital heart defect. He was being brought to Hershey Medical Center. And I'll never forget these words, he will be okay, which is something that was done in those days because people didn't know how to deal with grief and trauma like they do today. And 10 hours later, it was Chol Pesach, we got the phone call that he was about to die. And we were not told to rush over a half hour away to go hold and see the baby. It was Erev Shabbos, it was Chol Pesach. My father didn't know what to do. He had been in Smicha then for 30 years. He called the Rav's office. And thankfully, whoever he had spoken to had said the baby had lived. We need to give him a bris, and we're going to give him a name, and we're going to bury him. We didn't know then what we know now, that we can take the time to bury a baby. The same halacha doesn't apply to a quick burial. And we needed to bury him within a few hours. My father suggested that we named him Pesach, because why they would think we would ever forget that about what happened, but we named him Pesach. I was told by my mother and my mother-in-law, who meant well, you're not going to go to the funeral. And my husband, who was also a child of Holocaust survivors, was told, you must go to the funeral. And we each, I think, had to handle things differently. And in some ways, if the word is jealous, that the other one couldn't be true to themselves, and I couldn't be at the funeral, and he couldn't stay home with me. And then we were told, just move on. We were told not to go for therapy because of 35 years ago, many of you here know, therapy was not talked about. Why are you going for therapy? You know why you're depressed? Your son died. Professionals in the field, our doctors, rabbis, whoever thought they knew what they knew, told us, just go home and get pregnant. You go home and get pregnant and everything will be okay. And we did. And we were blessed with our daughter, appropriately named Eliana Yafa. She was born a year later, 2 days after our son's birthday, April 16th. She was born April 21st. And for the Hebrew calendar was Yom Ha'atzmaut. And everybody thought we were going to be okay. Oh, one more thing. My sister, who was living in Florida at the time, she gave birth 2 weeks after our son died. So we were dealing all with that situation. When couples call us and they say, you're not going to believe our story. Our story is so unique. We know that living in the communities that we do, this is more common than not. And we went home. I was a kindergarten teacher for many years, went back to teach a month later. And they wanted to bring in, at that time, Dr. Brazelton, who remember was the child expert. They wanted to bring him in and to talk to the children and the parents what to do. But the truth was nobody really understood how to talk to children about grief and trauma. I said, let me just go into the class. And the best days that I spent were the days I was with the children, because they got it. They knew to be true. They would come over and say, Mora Riva, are you sad? Because we know your baby now is in Shemayim. Do you miss him? Are you going to see him when Mashiach comes? They were the only ones I could be honest with. We couldn't go back and talk to our friends. They were all having babies. We couldn't talk to our families because they didn't know what to say. We were blessed to have a wonderful rabbi in our community, Rabbi Yosef Adler. He was young too, raising his family. Nobody knew the words. So we just hit it and went on. People would call me privately, again, as Romi said, before cell phones, before internet. My only source, every week I would read the Jewish press, hoping I was going to see a support group, hoping I was going to see an article written, but that never happened. People would call me privately. You know, I had a loss, I had a miscarriage, I had a stillbirth. We talked on the phone and we promised if we ever would see each other in the supermarket, never to acknowledge it. He would call me, my sister in Boston, what should I say to them? And again, we're never going to talk about it. After our second child, Aliana, was born, we experienced a couple more miscarriages. Between all of our 6 miscarriages happened between 9 and 12 weeks. At that time, there was no medical explanation. Just go home, have your D&C, go home, went back to teach the next day, don't talk about it, raise your family. In fact, 2 of my D&Cs were done in the 90s in an abortion center, because at that time they thought those were the best doctors. They were trained the most. Yes, afterwards, when I finally started Nechama Gumford, my doctors apologized to me for sending me there. Then we were blessed with twin girls. And I remember comments saying, oh, we knew you'd have twins, as if to say, you know, it'll make up for the one you lost, sort of. Again, I want to repeat, then as now, when people say things, they're saying it from the heart. They're trying to fix it. They're trying to help. Nobody's coming from a negative place. But as I always used to tell my kindergarten students, as I tell people now, you know, you have to think before you speak. And they would tell me, oh, you had 3 girls. I hope you're going to have your boy. As if to say I never had my son. And then my twins were born. A few more miscarriages happened. We kept going on, but something was bothering me. There was nothing here. There was nothing in the secular world. There was nothing in the Jewish world. There was no recognition of pregnancy, infant loss. As you had brought up, I don't understand. We had our child at any stage. This was our child. We're taught, you know, in early childhood, as I was teach, we play house. You're the mom, you're the dad. We name our children after what Parsha story or what holiday's going on. And I can't talk about my grief. I can't talk about my trauma. They, whoever they are, would tell us what to do. And again, I want to reiterate what everyone said here tonight. It's choices. It's choices what people can suggest what to do, but it's about the couple and respecting them. And everybody tried to tell us what to do and how to move on. When really what we know today is you don't move forward, you don't move on. You have to put your child into your life and move through it. And it was while I was teaching that I realized I can't keep looking at the Jewish press. The internet had been invented. There was nothing out there. But I saw in the secular world, people started talking about it. In the early 2000s, my Lamaze teacher, a wonderful Irish Catholic woman, called me up one day and said, I just came back from a program. I was trained in Wisconsin, and it's called Resolve Through Sharing. They're going to help families with pregnancy infant loss. And I said, I don't know what you are drinking, but that can't be true. And she invited me to come to the local support group in Teaneck, and I did, and quickly understood that so many of what families are going through, I understood. But I knew that there was something missing, that in our Judaism, in our culture, in our religion, we needed to sort of study and learn and how to move through it and how to take what society was learning about PTSD, about trauma, and how it relates to early miscarriage, infant death, SIDS, stillbirth, and even toddler death. And how can we put our knowledge of Judaism and with the help of Rabbanim who were willing to listen and to help, as well as my father, I was able to sort of get people to listen. I remember Dr. Blumenthal, I don't know if you remember, meeting you years ago at an early childhood conference, and you talked about this in a conference, how to talk to children about grief, and you mentioned it with one of your vignettes. And I said, wow, who is this man? And we started talking. And over
Riva, respectfully, I'm going to ask you to hold at this point because we have so many questions that people have submitted. It really is very important to listen to your conversation, and listening to all of you. Half of this has turned into a parenting seminar. As so many of you said, my parents mentioned to me good-naturedly, and so on and so forth. At the time, it was absolutely good-naturedly. Riva, thank you very much for sharing your personal story this evening. And I just must add how wonderful it is to hear from each and every one of you the wonderful families that you have, that you are raising, the children, the grandchildren. Baruch Hashem, thank God. We have many questions. Each one is important. Let's try to get to as many as we can. Let's try to give some brief commentary so we can get to a few. I'd like to pose the first question to my colleague at OHEL, Basil Kielsen, who is the clinical supervisor of OHEL's Early Childhood Mental Health Program. Basil, share some of your thoughts on how to navigate pregnancy after a loss. How do you advise people? The entire conversation this evening.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really the area where I have experience with working postpartum and perinatal. And I myself experienced a loss and a pregnancy after that loss. So I speak both from my own experience, but also what I know. So what we know is that it can be a time fraught with a lot of anxiety, which I think is both, if you take a moment and pause, is not surprising that when a woman finds herself pregnant after she has a loss, she's anxious. But I want to take a moment and just dive into what exactly is going on, which maybe can help someone who is experiencing that anxiety know what is normal, what is not, and how to manage it. So the way our memories work is we definitely have memories that we remember and picture. We can recall them. We have memories we can talk about, but our body also remembers. There's a great book called The Body Keeps Score, really discusses this idea. Our body remembers. So when a woman is going through a pregnancy and her body is remembering, wait, I know these feelings, these sensations, these hormone changes, and I know how scary these are because these feelings and these sounds and these scents and the sonogram screen and the waiting room, all of this reminds me of something very scary. And it will immediately start your system to start being a little anxious. And even if you don't want to, even if you feel like, why? They said it's a normal pregnancy. Why can't I just be happy? What is wrong with me? This is something I want to tell you you're not doing something wrong. This is how the body works. This is how we are wired to keep ourselves safe from something that we are perceiving as dangerous, even though we know intellectually it's not. And the best thing to do really is not to fight and suppress. It does not work. When we say, no, it can't be, I can't be this anxious, I can't be this worried, it doesn't go away. What happens is it pops up when we least want it to or expect it. So a better option is to lean into it and say, you know what, that curtain, the way it ruffled, I'm in the waiting room and I hear that curtain and I feel just that sensation of, oh my gosh, is something the matter? And if you take a moment and lean, and you know what, it reminds me of that sound when the doctor came in to give me the bad news. And I'm remembering, you will find that you will slowly get more at peace. I know I'm here now, and that was then. And that is one of the ways to lean into the anxiety. If the question, which I don't know if you're going to ask, but I think it's just important to put out there, how do I know my anxiety is in the normal range versus this is getting too much? And really, for everyone, it's a little different, but what I would say, working in the perinatal and doing treatment for women who have experienced trauma and pregnancy is that, are you managing? Are you able to get to the doctor? Are you following doctor's recommendations? Sometimes the anxiety is so bad you're not getting to appointments. Or sometimes the anxiety is so bad that you are not fantasizing at all about the baby in the second trimester. Particularly, it's not so common, or in the third trimester, you have absolutely no connection, or maybe you're ruminating, you're constantly doing things to make sure everything's okay. It could be that you would get through, but I want to let you know that there is support, and you can do, it can be therapy, it can be support groups, but you don't have to be so paralyzed by what we would say is normal, but also very triggering fear regarding the new pregnancy. It doesn't need to have a complete shadow from your loss.
Rachel, you mentioned about leaning into anxiety. I love that phrase. Rabbi and Rebbetzin Goldberg. Rebbetzin Goldberg, I have a two-part question. And Rabbi Goldberg, a question for you too that I'm going to ask others to comment on also. Rebbetzin Goldberg, a two-part question. What is the one most important advice that you find yourself giving women who've experienced a pregnancy loss? And secondly, what's the one most important comment you give to a mother of a daughter who's experienced a pregnancy loss in order to support? And Rabbi Goldberg, I will ask you, what's the most important comment that you give the husband who is trying to understand how he can best support his wife in this traumatic situation? Rebbetzin.
What I've said to people, and I really believe it, is that time really does heal a lot. You'll never forget it, and this will always be a part of your past and a part of your life, and will always be with you. But you know, this is 21 years ago. The way we feel when we tell over the story, we think about it, is extremely different than when it was so soon after. And you know, time heals, and I think people need to hear that you'll have a different perspective, you'll feel differently in time. And I think people need to know that there is a future, there is an after. You will be able to live, you'll be able to move on to an extent, and this is not going to hold you back and take you down forever, you know. And I think that's could be helpful, and just to be positive always about the future. And I'll tell you the things that helped me is Emunah. You know, I remember telling this doctor when I was it was really like a very long induction, and we were sitting there talking, and I said, you know, I'll explain to her how I don't understand how people who don't believe in a Hashem and don't believe there's a reason for why life happens to get through these things. And this is any kind of loss or any kind of tragedy or anything difficult that you go through. If you don't have Hashem holding your hand, you don't believe that there's a reason and you were chosen and this is part of your story and this was necessary. It's so hard to stomach at the time, but you have to have the attitude or else you just fall apart. And I feel like Emunah is the greatest therapy. You know, when you have that deep relationship with Hashem and you know that he's there and he's doing all this for a reason, it helps you move on. And I really do believe that. As far as a mother, I think it's very hard to watch your daughter go through this. And it's especially hard because as a mother, you're also going through it. It's your grandchild and you're very, you're very directly and personally involved. I think it's very important for a mother to listen and to just do whatever her daughter needs, not to interject her own experiences. Well, you know, when I had a miscarriage or when to really just try to understand what your daughter is going through, help her through it, help her with the other stuff. She might not want to turn to you and communicate with you exactly what she's feeling. It might not be an emotional help that she needs from you, but more like just take care of everything, get the meals going and make sure if the other kids at home are taken care of and that the house is in order and, just be there for her as like that support, that help, and make sure that you're just listening and experiencing it through her eyes and not through your own life experience. I think that's a really important piece of it.
Thank you very much. Time heals, and be there for her in a very practical way. Rabbi Goldberg, the advice to a husband.
Yes, I want to say a few things. And first of all, thank you to the panelists. It's heart-wrenching to listen, and doesn't matter how many years go by. When the story is told, it could have just happened now for the people listening for the first time. And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing. It was really inspiring. There are a few things that I think are really important. Yochevet's point about Emunah is critically important. I know that I remember feeling very powerfully the fact that in our case, there was no explanation. They did a chromosomal analysis, nothing came back. The umbilical cord was normal. There was no explanation. And for many people, that would leave them feeling empty and wondering. For us, for me, it made me feel even more, Hashem, this was your plan. This wasn't meant to be. And the fact that we can't point to or say this is why it happened, And the mystery around that only made the mystery of you and the way you work more palpable and more real. And we had to submit and surrender to it. And it's the only way. So on the one hand, Emunah is enormously important. On the other hand, and I'm seeing some of the questions that are coming in that we can read, a lot of people's faith is really rocked. It's shattered. And, Hashem, the joy, when you see the second line on that pregnancy test, everyone's got to skip in their step. They find themselves saying, Baruch Hashem, maybe an extra tehillah, maybe davening a little more kavah. Thank you so much. This is amazing. The dream, the hope, the aspiration, picturing what it will be like, the maternal, the paternal instinct that kick in, all that burst of faith in Hashem, the reverse happens when the dream is shattered. And you wonder, where are you and why? And I was recently talking to someone I love very much in our community who struggled with pregnancy and a lot of pregnancy losses, and is a person who's different than the way they were when they first got married, because they wonder, Hashem, how many times are you going to, and hearing the stories that we heard tonight, if it wasn't meant to be, then don't let it be. But to make me be pregnant, have dream, endure pain, experience and think, and then abruptly end it, why? Where are you? So I want to say, and I believe this very, very strongly, it's okay to be angry at Hashem. And in some ways, there's no greater expression of faith in Hashem than to be angry at him. Because you're not angry at a figment of your imagination. You're not angry at someone or something you don't believe. You're angry at a parent who you hoped or expected more from. Now, and this, I could give you many sources. It's not the goal of tonight. From an Avram Avinu who challenged Hashem with stone, to a Moshe Rabbeinu who said, show me your face, to many examples and precedents that Baruch Hashem we have for the fact that we don't use the anger as an excuse to walk away. We use it as a impetus to come closer, but to feel like, where are you? You're my father. Where are you? Why? Is okay as long as you then say, but here I am nevertheless in your arms, and I need to feel your embrace, and I need your support, and I know it's all from you even when I can't understand it. But to know that you have license and it's permissible and it's okay to protest or be angry, and to use that as an expression of faith, deepening faith, rather than to walk away, I think is something that's very important.
And to not feel guilty being angry also, to not feel guilty having those emotions of sadness. How could I be sad? But Hashem wanted it for me. When I said Emunah, I wasn't meaning that it doesn't give the license to be able to be upset about your situation. Those people are like, oh, Baruch Hashem, it's all meant to be. When they go through something difficult, that's,
and it may not be real, right?
Difficult level to get to.
And if you're not true to yourself, then it's not going to last, and it will catch up with you. And there are those who say the right thing, act the right way, pretend the right way. And when they're in denial of natural and normal feelings, it will catch up. On the other hand, if you fast forward decades later and you're still as angry and haven't worked it through, resolved it, developed it, there also is a problem. One other point, if you'll indulge me, is, and I wanted to say this earlier, if I say nothing else tonight, I believe this with every fiber of my being. I believed it in our personal experience, and I believe it for others. The Gemara in Yevamot Samach Beis says that Mashiach won't come until every soul, when 6,000 years ago, 5783 years ago, when Hashem created the world, he created every soul that was destined to exist. And he has a celestial storehouse, a file cabinet. We don't know how he's organized, but at the right moment of conception, he reaches into his file cabinet, he takes a neshama and he puts it in a guf. He takes a soul, he puts it in a body. It houses that soul for 70, 80 years, David HaMelech said. We're blessed to live in a time that can be even much longer. Too many times it's shorter than that, but it's a very small amount of time. The soul exists since the beginning of time, and it will exist eternally as an extension of Hashem. The body is temporary and finite and mortal, and they're only together for a small amount of time. But the Gemara says something, this is not me, it's Chazal 2,000 years ago. Look it up, Yevamot Samach Beis. It says Mashiach can't come and won't come. Redemption can't happen until every soul that he created is brought down and finds expression here. And only when there's a realization of that creation, for whatever reason he designed it in such a way, can redemption, can we, the world, turn and pivot to the next stage. And there's a strong tradition that when there is a miscarriage, when there is a stillbirth, when there is a life that didn't even live, there's a feeling like, what was the point? What was a waste? And I remember you're expressing this and going through this, and of course, normally, like, why? Why all the aches, all the pains, all the nausea, all the vomiting, all the sleepless nights, then the labor and the milk coming, all for what? There's no life, there's no human being, there's no purpose for what? It was a waste, it was for naught, it was for nothing. And compounding the pain of the crushed dream of what isn't is the feeling of the waste of what was, unrealized and for no reason. And that's entirely wrong. It's so wrong. I can't express how strongly I feel It's wrong. Rav Moshe Wolfson expressed it even more beautifully or strongly than I when he said, we don't believe in a Torah hashkaf and the notion of a miscarriage. A miscarriage means something went wrong. A miscarriage of justice, a miscarriage of technology, a miscarriage is that something went wrong and it was a waste and it broke down and it didn't work and there was no reason. And that's not our view. Our view is that the person who carried was the vehicle for this pure neshama to come down to this world, which was a incremental, important step closer to redemption for a soul to have come down, and it needed to. And though we didn't get to experience that animated soul housed in a body, we never experienced it, we never exchanged or communicated with it, but the soul existed. And that goes back to what I said earlier. It has a name and it has a bris, and we'll come back to life in Tchias HaMesim. It wasn't for naught, and it wasn't a waste, and it wasn't for nothing. The ache, the pain, the nausea, the vomiting, the labor, and it all was for something, and that was to bring us a step closer to Geula. And many will say, that's nice, but I'd rather have a baby. And we would have rather had the baby, but we're not given that choice. And if we were, of course, everyone would take the baby, but nevertheless have the comfort to know that it's not for nothing. The comfort to know that for whatever reason that maybe one day we'll find out, maybe not, you're chosen. And you can go from feeling, why did I lose the lottery by being chosen to experience the loss, to why was I designated to be among those who were a vehicle to bring a soul that came down. Every other soul that lives, that goes up, has to go through some purification process to get rid of the contaminant, to get rid of, and to be a vehicle that brought a soul that came pure and was returned pure and advanced us towards redemption. As painful as that is, and as badly as we wish it didn't happen and would exchange it to be able to hold a living baby, it is a source of comfort that people need to know that it's not a miscarriage, and we don't believe in a miscarriage, and it's not for nothing, it is for something. And to feel comforted by that thought, even if in that moment it's not comforting, to somewhere store that thought and come back to it and draw from it when it's something that will be powerful in the future.
Rabbi Goldberg, that was just an incredible commentary on the meaning and value. It's very difficult to say the words of death, of a loss, and you put it into a very meaningful context. Thank you. Dr. Barron. Dr. Barron, you spoke about loss, pregnancy loss. You spoke about secondary infertility. You spoke about making a conscious decision when you wanted to try to get pregnant again. No doubt, well-meaning people said, I'm going to say it's stupid things. You know, why don't you try to get pregnant again? Why don't you have another baby? Move on. It's okay. Intrusive comments, personal comments that people have no business saying. How do you deal with it?
Frankly, it really depended on the time of day, the setting in which the person said it to me, and who the person was. And I think I'll just break it down in that way. It was a time that I was not rushed and I didn't have someplace else to be. Then I might give that person, again, depending on who they were, if they were someone close to me, I might give them more of a frank answer of, we've been through something and it's not the right time right now. And I might give them an honest answer. If I was rushed, I would brush them off, potentially even with something flippant of, you don't even know what I've been through. And frankly, I don't have time to talk about this right now, and leave. I think, though, that there is an opportunity in terms of the kind of person that is the person that is giving over that kind of response. There's an opportunity to educate if you feel that they can be educated. If this is a person that you think can hear you when you say, I'm in deep pain, I've been through something absolutely horrible, and it's really upsetting when you start asking invasive questions about my personal life, about my birth plan, about my body, about my uterus. It's really not appropriate. And frankly, I don't want to talk about it. Like, if that's a person that you think can be educated, because that person will then take your response and then not use it on someone else, then I would often err on that side and try to do some education. But if I felt the person was beyond education and really wasn't going to hear anything I had to say, I just, gave more of a flippant answer and kind of protected myself from that insensitive comment. And I just, if you don't mind, I just want to add, if I can, 2 more points about 2 topics that were brought up. When Rachel Kilson was speaking about pregnancy after loss, and she was talking about how do you know when things are getting to be to a point of where you need extra outside help? And she mentioned peer support and she mentioned therapy. But the one thing that she didn't mention, which I think is important to mention, is medication. And I'll use myself as an example. I had 4 pregnancies that were lost in the 2nd trimester. And each of those pregnancies, the subsequent pregnancies, I got more and more anxious every single time, and especially as it was heading towards that mark when I had lost the pregnancy previously. During my pregnancy with the twins, I basically was completely not functional, never left my house. I had anxiety attacks, panic attacks, trying to get out to these doctor appointments to check the baby's heartbeats, to the point of where my doctors put me on an anti-anxiety medicine because I literally couldn't get out the door. So I just want to advise everyone who's listening that there are medications that are safe for you and safe for the baby if your anxiety is completely just unmanageable. That was one point. And just one other general point, the topic that all of us are speaking about, the reason why this is so important is that pregnancy loss happens to 1 in 4 pregnancies. It's not 1 in 4 couples. It happens to 1 in 4 pregnancies. So that means in our community, in the Frum community, it's happening to you or it's happening to someone that you love. And that's why all of these conversations and these questions are so important. And we're so happy that all of you are here and listening to the conversations that we're having.
Dr. Barron, thank you very much. I would just add to how you respond to people who ask intrusive questions, as my style would be, when they ask me a question, I would just stare at them and not say a word and let them know that that's just not a question to ask. Dr. Blumenthal, I could listen to you for hours. I would like you to give me a 1-minute answer to the following difficult question. Guilt. Speak to the person who feels that they could have prevented this pregnancy loss. She just feels she didn't do enough. How do you handle the guilt?
You asked me to speak in 1 minute about something that's been in Judaism for 2,000 years. Okay, I'll try, but I think there are 2 points I'll make about guilt very quickly. One is there's 2 types of guilt. There is rational guilt and emotional guilt. Rational guilt is something you did something wrong, and it can be identified and remedied, and it's good to have guilt because it corrects behaviors that we do wrong. But the more tricky one is the emotional guilt, which is a guilt that's not logical, that's not rational, and you can't talk someone out of it. And in my experience with grief, most of the guilt I deal with is more of an emotional guilt. And very often it's an assault on how we define ourselves. And especially we define ourselves as parents and mothers in particular, as ones that give life and bear life. And when that doesn't happen, it's an assault on our sense of who we are. And that's where a lot of the guilt comes from. The other part of the guilt is we have this myth that we run the show, that we're in control, and that things happen for reasons that we can identify. And that's comforting to us because then we feel it's like an orderly and predictable world. But those of us who are God-fearing individuals or religious individuals know that we don't run the world and that things happen that appear random and almost senseless to us, but have a logic and which actually Rabbi Goldberg sort of alluded to, but have a logic and an order that's beyond our comprehension. So when we foist guilt on something for which there is no reason to feel guilty, we're clinging to this belief that we can explain anything and everything that happens, which we really can't.
Thank you very much. Our colleague Laura Bart is going to be sending out to all who joined us this evening a request to spend literally 2 minutes to complete a feedback form, which helps us organize future sessions. This evening, we discussed reimagining perinatal loss, including the issue of secondary infertility. It was our pleasure to hear Rabbi Ephraim and Rebbetzin Yocheved Goldberg, the Boca Raton Synagogue, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, Dr. Amy Barron, Romi Friedman, Riva Judas, Rachel Kielsen. Our thanks to everyone who joined us this evening, and we hope that everyone is well, stays well, and when you're down in South Florida, do stop in BRS. Everyone, have a safe, good evening, and a wonderful Hanukkah. Good night.